welcome to all of you. And I appreciate you joining us. We were speaking beforehand, we'll call it backstage before the presentation, talking about how exciting this is, the series that Wendy created for our synagogue, and how I love the idea that we're sharing this between two synagogues. That's exciting. Also, I love the idea that so many of you are interested in hearing the great rabbis, and these really are the great rabbis of our city, and I think over the course of the year of the country as well. It's really a credit to all of you that this is important to you. And I think particularly tonight, this topic and speaker are a gift to all of us. I'll say a little more about that in a moment. I want to begin again by thanking a few people. And I want to primarily, and first and foremost, thank you, Wendy Levinson, because this was your idea. You said to me, what do you think of, and could this happen? And knowing that it was you, and knowing you, at least 20 years, I thought, well, this probably won't just be an idea that's let to sit, that's allowed to sit. She'll do something with this. And lo and behold, Wendy, we have a fantastic series. I want to thank a number of people who have been generous and funded us so that we can produce the series this year. And that's Dr. Jack and Beth Lynn, Corey Notkin, Wendy Levinson herself, Robert and Susie Weissman, Dan and Carla Adivi, Donald and Alice Goldsobel, Sam Finkelberg and Betsy Shore, Doreen Cates, and Mickey Bilski. To all of you, thank you very, very much. So I want to tell you a little about the format of the evening. You may have joined us for the first in our series, which was with Chabad of the Kanehos rabbi. That was Rabbi Brisky. And that was talking about the issue of faith, the thoughts on faith. And just so you know, the format of the evening is like this. Rabbi Finley will speak shortly. He'll make a presentation in a format that suits him. And you'll see at the bottom of the screen, if you haven't already seen it, on your phone, iPad, whatever device you're using, you'll see the ability to interact with him and with us tonight. And that's through asking questions and then seeking answers. Now, I know him a very long time. I think you'll not only get answers to your questions, but you'll get very good, thoughtful, deep answers. So look at the Q&A at the bottom and take a moment, if you're not so Zoom adept, to just have a look and see what you're able to do. You should be able, by scrolling over things in Zoom, touching them, to illuminate them. So on my screen, I'm looking, and it says right now there are no open questions, but I'm sure there will be shortly. Okay, sorry, Hannah? Yes, somebody's raising a hand, and I don't know that I can respond to that because we're not able to interact in that way. But what I want to ask you to do, Johanna, and anyone else, is use Q&A instead. So I won't be giving a formal biographical introduction to my colleague and teacher, Rabbi Finley. Wendy will do that. But what I'd like to say is that we have a true gift tonight in this teacher and this thought leader and this rabbi. He was my rabbi in rabbinic school, and I'll say, of my many great memories of rabbinic school, my greatest truly were with Rabbi Finley in class. A lot of deep thought and discussion and challenging reading that you assigned that I still look to. What I want to say also about Rabbi Finley is, to him and to all of you about him, is that you've been not only my teacher, but my inspiration in so many ways, and a great influence on myself as a rabbi. So I'm truly, truly grateful to you. And the topic that you chose for tonight, I think, is the topic of the year 2021. Maybe it was the year 586. The same topic would have been necessary and timely, but certainly all of us showed up tonight because we want to have a sense of how to be in this world, and Judaism gives us a great sense of that and clarity when otherwise we might be lacking that thing, which is clarity. So let me say no more. I want to invite Wendy to introduce our speaker, Rabbi Mordecai Finley. Wendy, if you would.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ron. I would like to introduce you to Rabbi Mordecai Finley. He is the founding rabbi of Or Hatorah Synagogue in Mar Vista, which is a traditional progressive congregation. And he has been the founding rabbi since 1993. He was the co-rabbi of Makom Or Shalom, a synagogue celebrating the Jewish traditions of spirituality and meditation. And that was from 1994 to 2002. He was also the assistant rabbi at Stephen S. Wise Temple from 88 to 93. He is a session leader and spiritual counselor and advisor, and called Recovery Integrity Addictions Treatment and Recovery Center, which is in Los Angeles, and his specialty is spiritual psychology. And he is presently there from 2017. He was also a professor of Jewish thought and mysticism, Jewish ethics, and professional skills at the Academy for Jewish Religion, California campus. He was the provost of the Academy for Jewish Religion from 2003 to 2008. He was also the president of the AJR. And he was an adjunct faculty at the USC School of Law. He taught Jewish law and ethics. He was also the faculty and fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, and an instructor at the Wexner Heritage Foundation. He was a layman fellow at the Brandeis Bardeen Institute and an adjunct assistant professor at HUC-JIR School of Undergraduate Studies. He was also a professor at Loyola Law School and at University of Judaism. He has so much experience teaching that we are so lucky to have him here with us tonight. He has been a visiting scholar and a scholar in residence at many organizations. And in addition, he speaks at Federation and at fundraising events, educational events, and other forums and panels. We are so delighted to have him join us tonight, and we are so honored and privileged that he has joined us. May I introduce you to Rabbi Mordecai Finley. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Wendy. It's an honor to speak at your synagogue. Rabbi Lipaz, our esteem is mutual. You truly honor me by including me in this group. Wendy, it's been a pleasure working with you and getting this far. So you have a great team. I can tell a wonderful synagogue, and I'm very, very happy and honored to be part of your program. So the topic of the Jewish ethics of civility, let me just break that down for a moment. Whenever we talk about ethics, we actually mean something that's enforced in all places at all times. The person who made that most obvious is Immanuel Kant, but in general, if something is moral or ethical, they're actually synonymous words, moral from the Latin root and ethics from the Greek root. People try to differentiate them, but that's okay, but they actually don't mean anything different at their root. To say something is moral or immoral means it's all people at all times. Now, some people don't believe that there is something called a moral code, a moral law. They believe it's all subjective or rooted in your place in history, rooted in your nation, meaning it's relative to your culture. Judaism does not believe in moral subjectivity or moral relativism. I'm not saying if you're Jewish, you have to believe in the idea of a moral code. I'm just saying when you look at the Bible, the Talmud, other texts, it does believe there's something that we call, for lack of a better term, what I call moral realism. Moral realism holds that there are actually better and worse answers to moral questions, meaning there really are better and worse answers. There might not be an absolute answer. We might not know what the answer is. We might not even know what the question is. But it means that when we do engage in a moral discussion, we are trying to find out really what's the better or worse way to go about things. So when we say ethics, at this level, we are implying moral realism, not absolutism, just realism. Civility has to do with the basic respect we afford another human being. And the Jewish side of it means what does the Jewish tradition say in particular about a universal value? So to study Jewish ethics doesn't mean that ethics is just the, as it were, belongs to Judaism, but rather there's a Jewish way to think about ethics. And therefore, when I say a Jewish way, I primarily mean asking what our textual tradition says, what the Bible says, what the Talmud says, and later commentators. Just another introductory word. Morals typically means relationship between people in the interpersonal space. You can talk about spirituality and musar as inner character, let's say, and Judaism is profoundly interested in the spiritual character side. Sometimes that is called character ethics. But when we talk about civility, we're in the interpersonal space. So Judaism has a great deal of teaching about our, as it were, interpersonal lives, from couples to families to communities and all the way outside, as far as we can reach. So what do I mean by morality? I'm going to give you the minimal negative and then also a minimal positive. Minimally, to be moral means that you don't cause intentional, avoidable, unnecessary harm to another person. That's just a thumbnail. It would require many, many volumes to fully explicate out that idea. But immorality implies harm, including violating a sacred covenant and so forth, the other person, which is understood to be harmful to the other person. And on the other side, to be moral can mean to benefit a worthy person when possible. So to benefit the wicked is not moral. To benefit the good or neutral is moral. So on one side, it's don't do things that hurt. And the other side, produce the good for the good. Now, again, all these require lots and lots of more definition. If anybody has a question, you'll put it out there and I'll try to answer it for you. But my doctorate is in religion-social ethics. So I have a deep background in moral philosophy, and I've been a student and teacher of moral philosophy ever since I was in graduate school. So if you need any more on this, I'm happy to provide it. All right, so let's get to this idea of the ethics of discussion. For our purposes, I'm deriving my theory from the model of Talmudic debate, Talmudic discourse. If you've studied any Talmud at all, you know that one thing it's characterized by is what's called machloket. Machloket means something like dispute. So one rabbi or group of rabbis will take a stand, another rabbi or group of rabbis will take a stand, and the editor has put them into a disputational form. Now, not disputational in the sense of hostility. It sometimes gets there, but I would say most of the times not. And remember, these disputes are created by the editors. Sometimes the disputants didn't live in the same country. Some were in Eretz Yisrael, some were in Babylonia. Sometimes they didn't even live in the same century. So the editors created this literary genre called machloket, and they made it very clear that you can basically divide machloket into two archetypes, two paradigms. One is machloket l'shem shamayim, which means a machloket for the sake of heaven, meaning a machloket that's trying to figure something out or trying to get to the truth of the matter. There's something that we can't figure out. But unusually, and this is, I think, an interesting Jewish focus, what we're after only comes out when we're engaged with another person. When you're sitting by yourself trying to figure something out, you don't have the thoughtful presence of another human being, just to be a sounding board, but also just to get their point of view. What's fascinating is machloket, you might say, is the search for truth with someone who disagrees with you. The rabbis disagree with each other, sometimes profoundly. But the editors put them in machloket, telling us, if I want to figure something out, I have to find someone who disagrees with me. I don't want to live in an echo chamber. Okay? What I want to do is have my search for truth moderated by another person. So that's called machloket l'shem shamayim. Now, they really don't have another specific term for the other machloket, but the sense is it's just machloket for the sake of dispute. It's just machloket so people can work out anger and so forth. And there are a few examples of that in Talmud. I'm not going to go through them tonight, but the few times the Talmud does show a machloket that's not l'shem shamayim, it's very, very tragic. So I want to put a source text on the screen. Let me see if I can pull this off. Let's see here. All right, so I'm going to go over to my Chrome, and make sure that the text I want is front and center. And then I'm going to go back over to Fine People. And I'm going to hit my share screen and put this.
And I'll confirm as soon as we see it. Just
Okay.
so you know.
Okay.
Okay, we see the text on the screen. Yeah, thank you.
All right, this is from Sefaria.org, a fine repository of text. And this is probably one of the 4 or 5 most famous Talmudic texts on this idea of machloket. So what the editors have done is they've taken 2, which you might call archetypal schools of thought, different legal theories, as it were. The Beit Shammai, meaning the school of the great legal scholar Shammai, and the school of the great scholar Hillel. And as the Torah was inherited, they had the same text, but they interpreted the text sometimes in profoundly different ways. So this was an interesting thing. I mean, if the Torah was given and its meaning should be obvious, well, when you look at the Talmud, the meaning of the Torah is not obvious at all. They have the same text, but they understand it in different ways. So Rabbi Abba says that Shmuel said, 3 years nechliku, this is from the word from which machloket is derived, disagreed, Beit Shammai Beit Hillel. This one said the halacha is in accordance with our school of thought. One said the halacha, the legal decision, is ultimately with our school of thought. So a divine voice, a bat kol, enters into this discussion and says, this is a very famous line in the Talmud, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim, these and these are the words of the living God. Now that's very mysterious, because what the bat kol, an angelic voice, says is that even though they radically differ from each other, they're both the words of the living God. Another way of saying it is the Torah is multivocal. It's saying different things at the same time. Another way of saying it is that it's a hammer from the rock, that it's actually broken into different sparks and so forth, so that as you read one rabbi, sounds pretty right, you see another rabbi, sounds pretty right. Well, to say, well, one's wrong and one's right, it's better to say it's 2 different ways at getting at the truth. Now, in halacha, in law, you can only do one thing or the other, which means even though the approaches, you might say, are valid, different valid ways of getting at the truth, ultimately, you can only do one policy at a time. So then the question is, in general, not which thought is valid, because this Talmudic passage seems to say, well, they're both valid. They're both divrei Elohim chayim. In general, which legal system should become policy, okay? Should become actually the law. So the Gemara asks this question, the Gemara meaning, by the way, when you look at this, what's in the bold is actually in the Talmud, what's not in bold is the editor explaining as we go along. Since both of these are the words of the living God, since these and these are the words of the living God, why was Beit Hillel privileged that in general, the halacha, the law, goes with Beit Hillel? Here's the reason. Mipneshe nochin. Nochin means agreeable, like Noach. They were calm. They were agreeable. It says ve'aluvim. and they were humble. Vishonim, and they from the word Mishnah, like to Vishinantam, they taught. Shonim divrei hen v'divrei Beit Hillel. They taught both their opinion and the opinion of Beit Hillel. They want everybody to know both opinions. Velo od ella, and even more so, shemakdimin divrei Beit Shammai ledivreihem. They presented Shammai's views before they presented their own. So notice, you'll see the translation here. They were agreeable and forbearing. And then the interpreter, the expositor of the Talmud in the William Davidson edition, brings from other places, showing restraint when affronted. And when they taught the Halacha, they would teach their own statements and the other statements. When they formulated their teachings and cited a dispute, they prioritized the statements of Beit Shammai to their own statements in deference to Beit Hillel. Now, this is the Jewish paradigm for machloket. When you have machloket, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to be agreeable, kind, humble, explain both points of view, and defer to the point of view of the other party before presenting your own. Now, why is this such an important Talmudic ethic? There's a couple of reasons. One is they didn't want later students of the Talmud to wonder, had they considered this? Because a person might look at a Talmudic dispute and look at the answer and then ask, well, maybe they didn't think of answer B because they didn't consider it. So they want to put in all the possible answers to a dispute so the later student will realize they did consider everything, they arrived here. Second thing, why present the other first? I don't think the editors wanted people to think that and somehow it was a fixed game. They just like Hillel. They wanted Hillel to say, we want to present the other point of view as accurately as we can, as they would want it presented. And so as you study both points of view, there's a sense where, although the halakha came out a certain way, I'll give you an example in a moment, one can see the argumentation of both sides. And then the deeper understanding is, we'll never get to the truth of things if the different positions are not fairly presented. So the Talmud isn't trying to persuade you, as it were, bias you toward one or the other. The Talmud wants you to see things as clearly as each side would want to make it, and then try to give an answer if they could. Now, another part of Talmudic discourse, oftentimes a Talmudic machloket will end with the words teko, which is short for tekum, let it stand. We can't figure it out. So in modern Hebrew, teko means a tie, but in Talmudic Hebrew, Aramaic, it means tekum, let it stand. We can't figure this out anymore. Now, later halakhic decisors, they had to tell people what to do and what not do. People couldn't say, well, it's you can do this or you can do that. They generally wanted an answer that they could rely on. So many machlokot actually say tekom, let it stand, and others end with a kind of aporia, this Socratic idea of we don't know what to do. I'll give you without studying a text entirely, I'll give you a very brief example. There is a question in the Talmud that if a person breaks two laws at once, a severe law and a minor law, can they be tried for both? So for example, let's say a person breaks into a home to steal something and the homeowner confronts them and they try to kill the homeowner, they don't succeed and they get out. So they're guilty of attempted murder and burglary. Okay. So the rabbis say, Kimle midarabba mine. You can only try a person for the more severe thing. You just can't keep piling on charges. Hope that's clear. And so if they're not going to charge them for the lesser offense, if they grabbed something and got away, since they're not being charged for the greater offense, is it theirs? Which seems ridiculous. So one rabbi said, hey, if we're not charging him, it's theirs. And one rabbi said, are you kidding me? That's crazy. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. But the rabbi said, look, from a purist perspective, Since we're not charging them, you got to let it go. So these two go back and forth. And so when is Abaye? He says, if we're not charging, I'm simplifying this. If we're not charging them, it's theirs. Rava said, that doesn't make any sense. Even if we're not charging them, if this thing's still in existence, the owner can go get it back. All right. So when you look at this, it's in Tractate Sanhedrin. The argument seems to go according to Rava, which means if the article is still in existence, you can go get it back. And then it happened to Rava. It actually happened to him, where people broke into his corral and stole some rams. And he confronted them, and they almost killed him, and he almost killed them. And they got away with the rams. And they said, you going to go get them? He said, no. They said, why not? He said, out of respect for Abaye. Okay, so I'll try to repeat this. Rava presents a point of view. You can go get your stolen property. Abaye says, no, if they got away, they got away. When it happened to Rava, he went by the opinion of the person whom he had basically proven wrong. So it ends in a very mysterious place. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, what could have happened? This is one of the beautiful things about the Talmud is you got to go into the, you might say, the narratival depth of the law, because all law is rooted in a case, and every case is a story. So I'm thinking to myself, some people broke into Rava's corral. He confronted them. They got into a fight. He almost killed one of them. They got away with his rams. And they say, you want to get your rams back? This is Finley's reconstruction. He said, look, I almost killed somebody. I don't want the rams. I shouldn't even fought them over the rams. So I have a sense that once Rava experienced it, he said, okay, now I see what Abaye was up to. Legally, it doesn't make any sense that if someone steals your stuff and still has it, that you shouldn't get it back. So Abaye sounds very disconnected from reality. But the machloket ends with the editor saying it actually happened to Rava, and he agreed with Abaye. So reading this, I remember when I studied this passage, I said, what? You mean we spent all this time proving his side, and then when it happened to him, the Talmudic editors wanted us to know, well, actually, when it counted, he went with his disputant. Now, that's where it ends. So you say to yourself, well, is it Rava, which means if someone steals your stuff and you try to kill them and they get away, and it's still extant, can you get it back or not? Well, the law says, yeah, but you might not want to. So it ends in such a mysterious place. So again, we're not going to study that passage tonight, but I can give you dozens and dozens of machlokets in the Talmud where they're going back and forth and back and forth. Sometimes there's a decision. Sometimes it ends with tikkun, let this stand, we can't do any better. Sometimes it ends with aporia, we really don't know what to do. But the beauty, I'll call the poetics of the Talmud is not that we arrived at an answer, but we sought the truth together. And so that's the core of what I want to teach tonight about the ethics, the Jewish ethics of dispute. At some level, your inner motivation, while it might be to win the argument, while it might be to overpower the other person, there's a deeper ethic, which is, I want to find the truth. And maybe I don't know the truth. I think I'm right, but maybe I'm not. And I'll only know if I respectfully engage with this other person, let them have their say, to the point that I can present their point of view to their satisfaction. They can present my point of view to my satisfaction. And in between that, we can both learn and grow. So I believe this is the Talmudic model. And I believe it's a Jewish ethic and something we should master. Now, most people don't do this. Let's just go ahead and say right now, most people don't do this. And I've tragically seen, I'm sure Rabbi Lipaz has seen this as well. Spouses get into disputes. People get into disputes with oftentimes their teenagers. Families get in disputes. Synagogue boards get in dispute. Members get in disputes. And this wisdom of saying, hold on a second, there's a truth here that none of us knows. Can we calm down, engage in some kind of reasoned discussion, and allow the truth to emerge? Okay? That's what Jewish law teaches. Very few people can do it. So what I want to show is what it would look like actually. I created a handout. And then think a little bit about why people have such trouble doing this, what we can do about it, and then take your questions. So I'm going to do another screen share. Let's see. Here we go. Outline for engaging in civil discussion of moral issues taken from the model of Talmudic discourse. Can you all see it? It's up there? All right. Now, this is in your own mind and with your discussion partner. You want to establish that the discussion coming up, at least to begin with, is not to persuade, but to make sure that for each side to feel they've been understood by the other, unless a person says, yeah, go ahead and persuade me, I'm cool. But what you don't want to do is start to talk about something and immediately engage in an argument. That's not according to what I'll call the Talmudic model of discourse. The next thing you do is you establish a shared understanding of values and axioms. I'll give you an example. This happened after 9/11 when I was at a lecture for Wexner. So what I would do is I would go to one city after another. I'd go to San Francisco and San Jose and San Diego and Portland. I would go lecture in various cities. And, you know, in the year or so after 9/11, the Patriot Act and so forth, I mean, people were just, I mean, they were like at each other's throats. And they would say, Rabbi Finley, what do you think? I said, you know, one says, we can't sacrifice our rights for security. The person would say, well, our rights are going to look pretty useless if we get attacked again. And that's how they would start to fight with each other. I said, hold on a second. I think you both care about rights, and you both care about security, and you both care about our country, and you both care about the world, and you both care about people. So instead of picking the two things you disagree with, let's just pick all of your axioms at play. So here's what would always happen. They shared the axioms. They shared the values. Now, they would have never discovered this if, you know, someone like myself, I consider myself, you know, to some degree an expert in Jewish ethics. And I said, this is not the way we do it. So first of all, let's all share your axioms. Now, so why do people arrive at different axioms? Because our axioms, our values exist in a hierarchy. So for example, some people may start with compassion and then fairness. Other people start with fairness and then compassion. And then they disagree with each other. They say, you're not compassionate. You don't care about fairness. And they say, wait a minute, we both care about compassion and fairness. It's just at a more privileged place in the hierarchy. So if you find you're in dispute with somebody, the first thing to say is, can you share with me what axioms are on your mind? Now, here's the interesting thing. Most people don't even know. They don't know what their values are. I'm not saying they don't have them. They haven't reflected on them. What their values are, what their axioms, and this is actually a great gift you could give somebody. They say, well, I don't know what you mean. Say, well, you know, I say, well, you have this position, so it sounds to me that you care about this and this. They go, yeah, you're right. I said, so can we just pause for a moment and you kind of share with me what your values and axioms are? And when you want to know, I'll show you what mine are. So I have found, again, because I have expertise in this, when I pause somebody and I say, let's not start by arguing. I want to hear your axioms and values, and eventually I want you to hear mine. Secondly, I might have axiom and values. By the way, they will always be in tension with each other. So if I have a core set of axioms, they don't line up easily. I might believe in this axiom, and they disagree with each other. So not only do our axioms and values live in a hierarchy, and by the way, it can shift over time, they live in tension with each other. So for example, the Talmud does want us to live in peace with each other. So living peacefully is a value. The Talmud is also very much interested in justice. So when I hear people say, no justice, no peace, I want to say justice and peace. We're going to try to have as much justice as possible, as much peace as possible, and let's work it out in a civil way. So yes, I have values, that some might take precedence over the other, and they're in tension with each other, and we shouldn't think either or, we should think and. We should look at prioritizing. How do we maximize one while maximizing the other? The next thing is, and again, I'm taking this from studying a lot of Talmud, where exactly the disagreement of axioms exists, at the same time emphasizing what values are shared. Now, this is hard because when you get into it with somebody, we want to polarize. We want to say, I and my values and my axioms are good and yours are bad. Okay, like I'm okay, you're not okay. It takes a lot of conscious will to say, we probably share a lot more than we realize. So let's not start by arguing. Let's start by seeing what our axioms are and maybe why you put this ahead and I put this ahead. But let's establish the premises upon which this dispute will take place. So I'll say that again. All disputes exist on a premise, but we have to expose those premises. And we want to expose the premise in establishing our shared premises. Now, what I've discovered is people, again, most people don't think about these things much unless they're a trained moral philosopher. They basically say, here's my opinion, here's why I'm right and you're wrong. And so when someone says, well, can we just pause and try to uncover our moral premises? I have found that people discover their moral premises simply because they're asked. They've never taken the time to really think about this, nor has everybody been really interested. So I'm always interested in the moral premises of someone with whom I disagree or disagrees with me. Okay, next step, attempt to establish facts. And here's something you'll find over and over again. People of different opinions have access to different facts. Now, so ideally, when I say, well, I think this is factual, they say, no, that's not factual, this is factual. Don't start a war. Say, well, how would we find out what the facts are? Meaning, we're two intelligent people. We share some premises. I live in one factual world. You live in a different factual world. Can we spend a little bit of time trying to discover facts about which we both agree? So here's what happens. There actually are facts out there, but there's a tendency in what I call the ego self to edit out the facts that don't support your position and focus on facts that you do. It takes a lot of spiritual and moral heavy lifting to admit the facts that don't support your position. That doesn't mean your position is not right. It just means it's complex. So sometimes when I will point out a fact to somebody, they get really upset because they can tell, well, if that were true, then maybe they're wrong. I said, look, the fact that my fact I can show is actually factual doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you probably have put one axiom over another. This is very difficult, especially in the mood in our country now. People live in different factual worlds. And from a Talmudic perspective, I get to present all of my facts and you get to present all of your facts. And we try to figure out what that is, which means we have engaged machlokel Hashem Shemayim. Sometimes when people are sharing facts, I've noticed they radically to a value statement. Well, are you saying this? I said, I'm not saying anything except that I think what I'm saying is evidence-based. So, if you're committed to this path, other people spin out and start talking about their values. And what I've tried to do, and again, I always find when we can do this, it's really edifying for me. People have really changed me and changed my mind because they share their axiom and their values, and because I listen to facts that might have escaped me because I have a predisposition to want to think one thing or another. Okay, so it's important to say, well, those are values and axioms, and these are facts we can probably do. And let's just try to keep them separate. Conclusions are arrived once axioms, values, and then facts are discussed. Disagreement over what the facts are, the values are, should be acknowledged. Say, look, we just disagree on if this is factual or not. Let's just put a pin in that and move forward. Once we have clarified our axioms and our values and the facts as we know them politely, and listen to each other and tried to find what there's evidence for, what there's not evidence for, what we assume is true as opposed to can demonstrate is true. Then one says, and here's what we should do. Here's my values and axiom. Here's the factual world. Here's the policy I'm recommending. It should line up. And then you might say, if I've done all that at the beginning, they get to do it. My job when they're going through it is to help them, which means for a moment, I want as much as I can to help them, just like people do it for me. They say, okay, wait, are you saying this? I say, yeah, it's actually a better way to say it. Thank you. I'm sure Rabbi Lippaz has experienced this. Sometimes I'll teach something, person raises their hand and says, are you saying this? I say, that's what I should have said. So thank you very much for summarizing my thoughts so beautifully. Once each point of view has been presented, each side presents to the other. Okay, so let me repeat your point of view. Here's your values, here's your axiom, here's your facts, here's what you think we should do, and here's why. They go, yeah, you got it. Thank you very much. Then you say, okay, I really understand you. I disagree with you because I have a different kind of reasoning. My axioms and values, which are typically similar, how I understand the facts, which ideally should be similar. And here's my conclusion. Oftentimes because the facts are understood through a pre-existing value or axiom, and that's perfectly fine. Because remember, we're talking about listening, understanding, not so much persuading. But here's what happens. When I really listen to another person's axioms, values, facts, and conclusions, they don't have to try to persuade me because the truth is persuasive. When I hear all of that and I don't feel they're pushing on me, I say, well, that's really convincing. I really thank you. You've added to my fund of wisdom. I really feel gratitude. So when I discover that my thinking has been wrong, I feel very grateful because I don't want to be misinformed. I don't want to be guilty of bad thinking. So when a person says, well, are you saying you changed your mind? I say, I changed my mind. And I say, because the truth is the truth. It's not true because I think it. It's true because it's demonstrated to be true. At no time, and I can bring you many other examples from, proof text from the Bible and the Talmud, at no time devalue or disparage your discussing partner. No insults, no epithets, no name calling. Pas nicht, we just don't do it. And I can show you many texts that show that. And sometimes I find that somebody can't help but start using invective, raising their voice. I just say, look, this is not a machloket l'shem shamayim. We're not getting anywhere. Let's just stop it here and move on. Some people can do this, some can't. But one reason some people don't do it is they don't even know about this. And sometimes when I say to a person, hey, you want to talk about this thing, can I just share with you what the Jewish ground rules are? They say, yeah, sure. And I explain, they go, wow, this is great. I mean, can I do this with my spouse? Can I do this with my teenager? Can I do this with my parent? I said, this works everywhere. This works everywhere. And it helps people understand they're not arguing for their side. They're arguing for what is true. The discussion, the dispute is for what is true, not to win. So if one commits oneself to this, I think many of the disputes we have with other people can take on an entirely different nature. It's not about winning, it's about discovering truth. Okay, I'll stop there for now and see if there are any questions from Rabbi Lippaz or anybody else has a question.
There are. I have a few questions that have come in.
Okay.
And one I think was about tekud. Let me go back to that one. Okay, if you end in a tie, what have you accomplished? And doesn't each person in the discussion walk away with nothing, or even more, locking them into their own position? That's the first question.
Yeah, okay, so remember, tekud is a Talmudic term for what happens in the Talmud. Okay, so let's say I and another person have engaged in this discussion. And we agree to disagree. My attitude going in is I'm here to learn. I'll give you an example. Some people say, we don't talk to these horrible people that we think are evil. I say, okay. So, and they explained to me. And then I actually read in the news and about a black guy in the South who makes a point of disputing with Ku Klux Klan members. That's part of what he does. And many times after the engaged dispute, they admit they're wrong and they give him his robe. And he has a room in his house where he has the robes of Ku Klux Klan members who have given him the robe because he did this. So when people say, how dare you speak with these white supremacists? He says, how many robes do you have hanging in your closet? Now, a person could say to me, I'm still not going to talk to these disgusting people. I say, okay, all right, I'm not going to try to tell you to do what you don't want to do, but I'll give you my reasoning for talking with people I don't agree with. I'm not telling you what to do. I just want to say I have reasons and you have reasons, and let's walk away friends, and we don't have to agree with each other. So how do you not walk away frustrated? You decide not to be frustrated. You see, it's an inner disposition with which you arrive. So if I arrive at, hey, I'll hear you out, he'll hear me out, some truth might emerge, and if nothing else, you've shared your inner life decision that brought you to this point, you've heard mine. I think if people can share their inner lives with respect and listen with respect, we all walk away edified. That's my point of view. It depends on how you arrive, is probably going to influence how you leave the discussion.
Great, thank you. Another question. In conflict resolution, this sounds like interest-based problem solving. Are you familiar with it, and is it similar?
If the interest is the truth. See, I'm not interested in getting winning. I'm as interested in being wrong as much as I'm interested in being right. I don't care if I'm wrong. I just want the truth to emerge. And if my thinking does not align with the truth, I'll jettison my thinking. So if you mean by interest-based, if the interest is the truth, then yes. If the interest is not the truth, then no.
Thank you. Another question. If someone stole something from me and I don't want it back, but I report it to the police and they arrest the person, do I take back what was stolen from me?
Okay, well, are you Rava or Abaye? See, Abaye said no, Rava said yes, and then Rava changed his mind. So remember, this is called aporia, meaning we don't know what to do. This is a literary genre that shows you two intelligent people who knew the law disputing, and one changed his mind when he actually got there. This is not halacha lama'aseh. I'm not saying now when someone steals from you, that's not what this is about. This is about to give you an attitude toward dispute. Now, how does Jewish law decide it? You know, you can go look up the dispute between Rava and Abaye and look at all the medieval commentators and see what the different ones say. You see, that's not what I'm teaching tonight. I'm not teaching a legal resolution. I'm teaching how to do machloket. And that's one of my favorite passages, because the editors conclude this machloket in a stunning way. I mean, I'm reading this thing, figuring out the Aramaic, looking at the different sides, and I get to the last passage, and there's a sudden reversal, which is a great literary technique. A sudden reversal. I mean, if you're really invested in the text, it actually is breathtaking. So I had to read it again, make sure I got it right. And I said to the editors, thank you. Thank you for providing such an exquisite gem of Talmudic discourse. So remember, I'm teaching machloket, not what to do with, like the legal decision at the end.
Sherry asks a related question. Actually, she makes a comment. She says, I think your example of Rava and Abaye shows that the truth is sometimes better represented in the tender mercies rather than strict halacha.
Absolutely. This happens all the time in the Talmud, where there's a dispute about the liability of what are called porters, people who transport the goods of other people. And so the porters of Rabbi Bar Chana, go through a lot about what kind of liability do they have, and if you tell them to go down this road, they take a shortcut and stuff gets broken. And it's pretty clear from the case that the transporters, the transport company, is liable. Rabbi Bar Chana is not liable. So he put some articles of they gave him some articles of surety, meaning if they were liable, he keeps the stuff, and they go to court. They want their stuff back, and the judge listens to the cases, is give them their stuff back. And Rabbi Bar Chana says, Dinhu, is that the law? He goes, yes, it's the law. And he quotes something from Deuteronomy. And then they're on a roll, they say, and we want to get paid. So the judge says to Rabbi Bar Chana, you need to pay these people. And Rabbi Bar Chana says, is that the law? And the judge quotes a line that's not legal, but is more or less what you said. you shall do the righteous path. So this is not, I mean, these are poor people. If you keep their cloaks, they're cold at night. If you don't pay them, they don't eat today. And yeah, they were negligent, right? Everybody's going to know about it. But tonight they sleep with their cloaks, and tonight they eat. And so you're reading an entire machloket to set up liability. The editors put at the end a ma'aseh that refutes everything we just did. The commentators go berserk on this. They say, we don't know what to do, right? And I say, that's exactly where you're supposed to be. When do you enforce the law? When do you not enforce the law? When do you do damages based on the strict law? Sometimes when you do damages on well, what would happen if I not only judge in the other person's favor, but the damages to be collected are so injurious to the other that it's disproportionate. So in judges in Jewish law have an incredible discretion. I mean, they're not held by legal precedent as much as we have in our system. So there's an example, and I could give you many examples of the same kind of thing, where the law, as it were, is undermined by, using your term, tender mercies, not on a regular basis, but often enough that it definitely leaves an impression in the student of the Talmud. Now remember, this is a literary creation by the later editors that were trying to teach us something. They didn't then say, and here's what we're teaching you. They put out the document, and we're supposed to study and figure out what it is they're teaching us. So great question. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. So an anonymous question, and I say that so people know they can ask anonymously, says, can you discuss how we balance what's best for an individual versus what's best for the society at large?
Well, I don't believe there is something called society at large. I just think it's impossible to say what's best for society at large. Who can possibly assess such a thing? I mean, there are so many disparate voices, so many different opinions, so many different interests. So with all due respect, I know people talk that way. People in America today, society at large, I don't, because I really aim toward precision. So that might mean something precise. I can't figure out what it is. But let's say there is something called my interest and the public interest, let's say. And I try to think of that locally. So my interest is, I want to chop down my tree. The public interest is, that's an unusually beautiful tree. And the city comes in and says, you can't chop down that tree. That's a 200-year-old tree. It's a city artifact, and we'll help you take care of it, but you just can't chop that thing down. Okay. So then this actually happened to a friend of mine. And he said, well, I thought this was my yard. And the city said, kind of not. Right. And the city came in and said, you can't chop down the tree. And he was really upset. And then he just sat with it a bit and said, yeah, that is actually something exceptional. And the people of the city said, please don't, and then don't. So there are many times in life where what's in my interest might not be, when I say the public interest, I'm going to try to think local, because I can get my head around local. What do? I don't know. But I will listen to each side. So remember, I'm not, I know people really want, well, what about this? And what about this case? It's not what I'm teaching tonight. What I'm teaching is he doesn't go down to the city council and start with, you are a bunch of greedy idiots. No. He says, can you explain your reasoning to me? And they go, yeah. And they patient. And they say, okay, and explain your reasoning to us. And they sit there and there's a kind of a meeting of the minds. And sometimes in those things, the truth emerges. What many people do is they start with, you're a bunch of evil idiots. Their side says, no, you're an evil idiot. And I'm saying, don't do that. I can't tell you what that decision should be, but I can share with you the Jewish ethics of civil discourse, not the answer, but how to engage so that truth can emerge.
Thank you. So let me add another anonymous question, anonymous source. Machloket is, let's see what this person is saying. It's practical in today's society. How realistic or practical is it to attempt to apply it when people are emotional or even not of the same understanding or faith or have the same shared understanding of machlokot? Does this really resolve disputes today in our society?
Maybe not. But I can tell you one thing, I will not get into a dispute unless the ground rules are set. So when a person says to me, hey, Rabbi Finley, what's your opinion about this? I said, what kind of talk are we going to have? I mean, I'm going to say something, you're going to attack me? I'm not interested in it. I'm not going to attack you. I don't want you to attack me. They said, what do you mean? I said, well, let me just give you kind of basic. I share what I think and why. You share what you think and why. And then we respectfully repeat what either other says and see if anything comes of it. They said, I don't want to do that. I said, okay, don't do it. So what I'm saying is, I don't, so let's think about a synagogue board. You know, I mean, this ethos is very ingrained in our culture. So if anybody's going to have a leadership position or he's going to be on the board, they have, listen, they have it because I talk about it incessantly. They understand this is our ethos. And there's a moral obligation to live in this ethos. And it's, you know, it's very jarring when someone doesn't. Let's say someone's new and they say, well, that's a really stupid thing. The whole room goes, no, we don't do that here. If you want to say something, say, well, in my opinion, and here's why, and here's what I think, and I'm interested in your opinion. So there, I mean, so this works in families. The family can create this ethos. And by the way, a lot of what I do when spouses are each other's throats, I said, let's just create a different ethos for your family. Parents and teenagers, got to calm this down and create an ethos for the family. Small communities, right? Somebody has to say, look, here's our ethos. Here's how we roll here. And then, you know, if it's limited to a family, to a synagogue, you know, to other small organization, that's enough. I don't expect the media, politicians, I don't expect it. It makes me sad when I see the vitriol and the name calling, the invective. It makes me very sad. But we have freedom of speech here, you know, and I would never want, you know, a language patrol going out telling people what they can and can't say. That would be horrible for our country. I wish people would show more restraint. But let's say I'm going to leave the national stuff to the conscience of those who are conducting the debate. My focus is mostly families and friends. And why? Because I have heard of families estranged, friendships end, communities driven apart because they didn't know how to do this. So my immediate interest is really in the smaller setting. It can be applied to the larger setting, but I really don't see that as possible.
Thank you. A couple questions. One is, you know, you talk a lot about truth and axioms and principles, but what about when we're living in an age where we challenge each other's sources of truth? Meaning we're getting our truth about an issue that didn't occur next to us. We're not eyewitnesses to it. So we're taking journalistic interpretations of truth, and we know how journalism has changed. What happens in this age? How do we establish our truth?
Remember, we're talking about truth as fact. Now remember, truth as axiom is entirely different from truth as fact. So let's say there's a case where group A treated group B horribly. We agree that if that happened, it's bad. We agree. The question is, did it happen in the way described? And the person says, well, I read it in such and such a paper, and therefore I know it happened. Now, if I read a different newspaper, I might say, well, according to this newspaper, it happened differently. Now, if the machloket is engaged, we'll say, well, let's look it up. I'll look up yours, you look up mine. Let's try to find some other sources. And most of our time might be spent hearing enough different accounts, assuming we care enough. And there are a few things I care enough about to actually do this. So that's one thing I try to do. When I read something that I don't like, I say, like, I better read another news source and another news source and another news source. And sometimes get, you know, like dig as far as I can to what I'll call the primary evidence. You know, this happened once where there was a big thing that happened in the country. And I finally found the footage. And then I found the unedited footage. And I thought to myself, wow, this one news source, like they were living in a different world. That's not what happened, at least according to the footage. Now, from footage, you can't divine intentions, but I could see how somebody who wanted to make a point would distort what happened, hoping that someone wouldn't discover the footage. But nowadays, with the ubiquity of cameras, you can oftentimes just find exactly, at least from a video perspective. So we're talking about factual truth versus axiomatic truth. So axioms are not hard to agree on, especially if you say, what are your 5, what are my 5? Facts are much harder, and it may be impossible to get at facts. At that point, you say, look, we live in 2 factual worlds. Let's just not be mad at each other. Remember, I'm going in with the idea, I'm not going to walk away from this angry. I will pretty much expect that we live in different factual worlds. That's okay. What am I going to do? Walk away angry? I don't want to do that. The relationship might be important to me, where I say, look, let's just make sure that whatever happens next, our bonds remain. Can't hear you.
Families, sorry. How do you think families who already are living the wreckage of these kinds of broken relationships over differences, they haven't approached them this way, how do they create repair now? Yeah. The family that hasn't spoken to each other for 2 years because of their differences, what kind of repair can happen now in the aftermath?
Yeah, so first of all, at least one person has to go deep inside and overcome the need to have been right. And that takes you told me, Rabbi Lippaz, about the Musar classes going on in your synagogue. This is the heavy lifting of Musar. Disattach yourself from being right and value the bonds with another human being over being right. Say, okay, I was right, so what? I've lost something beautiful in my life. Meaning, ideally, the potential beauty of a relationship. So you can go to another person and say, I know we're not talking of a minute of your time, sure. Beyond the right and wrong thing, it's really hard to know what's right and what's wrong on something this nuanced, but I want to tell you, I regret the way I conducted myself. I should not have conducted myself in this manner. Let me give you an example. A synagogue member who was a tenant, and the way they described it, the landlord was actually inappropriate. And the person described to me, they really lashed out at their landlord, and the landlord wanted a victim. They were in this big dispute. And I heard the person's side, and I said, look, if what you're saying to me is factual, you're in the right, landlord's in the wrong. They said, thank you, Rabbi. I said, I'm not done. Could you have presented to this landlord in a different way? Could you said, hey, can we sit down for a second? I really want to know how you experienced what happened. And the landlord might say, I don't want to argue. No, I'm not arguing. Just they say, wow, I really get it. Yeah, I really see it from your perspective. I mean, from that picture, like I'm really not a good person. Would you mind if I shared you from my perspective? And what the person did is I trained the person how to do this. They went to the landlord and said, can we do a restart? The landlord said, sure. Sat down and said, I want to hear the whole story from your side. Landlord told it. The tenant said, okay, here's how I experienced it. The landlord said, wow, I really get it. I mean, I see this. The same thing happened. We experienced it differently. And the tenant said, so I want to apologize for how I came off. I didn't come off looking for truth, peace and reconciliation. I came off trying to win, and I really regret that. I hope you forgive me. And the landlord was like very impressed and said, yeah, that's really noble. I've never heard anybody say that. And the landlord said, let's just erase this. We're good. Let's just drop everything. So when a person says, let me just calm down and not apologize for my opinion, but apologize for how I conducted myself. I've done that many times. I apologize to my wife, I apologize to my children, I apologize to other people, and I say, without going back into the right and wrong, the validity of an argument, I want to apologize for my conduct. And oftentimes, other people are very touched that someone actually is accountable. They're aware, they're accountable, and they want to do teshuvah. So the first thing I would say to people, if there's some kind of a dispute, you may not want to take back what you think, but if there's been a breakage and there's some mutual accountability, you can always apologize for your conduct.
Beautiful. My question just now, looking at the time, it's 9:10.
Okay.
Do you have more you want to cover, or do you want to continue with?
Since it's 8:10, my presentation,
excuse me.
I'll be happy to take questions.
Okay. Questions. All right. So here's one. Somebody asked, Jeff asks, in today's world of social media, where we're pulled to our respective fringes, how do we tame our egos to allow us to want to hear the other side's truth? So it's a good reflective question.
That's a great question. So the first thing is, I would say, take all politics off your news feed. Out. You're not in that tribe anymore. You're in the tribe called the Truth and Reconciliation tribe. So look up Jonathan Haidt, look up the Truth and Reconciliation people, put those in your news feed. And something happens, and you say, okay, I want to find out what happened. So I'm going to look at the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and you kind of like get a different piece, and then you try find primary sources that are actually not that hard to find if you decide to look for it. And you say to yourself, I want to be an agent of the truth. I don't want to belong to this tribe or that tribe. Now, here's the downside. We're instinctively tribal. We want to run with a herd. I mean, it's a human desire to be protected by the herd. But the herd doesn't follow the truth. No herd. So you might lose your herd. And that's really tough. I mean, you might have to say to your herd, look, I share your values. The way we're talking about this one is not doing me, you, or the country any good. So can we just turn it down? So I have friends on both sides of the political divide. And what they've shared with me is, you've taught me how to go when I meet with my herd to say, there's a way to do this with kindness. There's a way to do this with respect. And what they've shared with me is how profoundly receptive people are. So one person is an activist, I won't say for which side, and the activists were like really angry. And so we're not going to persuade anybody. So we have to show love. Let's go out and present our case with love. And they feel they did an extraordinary job in one place in the country, because they all decided to approach it with, I respect you, I love you, you're a fellow citizen of my country, I'm thinking a little bit differently, would you hear me out? And it didn't escalate. And it looks like a lot of people got persuaded. I mean, to the point that an election this person thinks that they helped change an election because they came from respect and love. So I actually believe if you really, really internalize this, and again, I don't recommend anything getting worked out in social media. That's the worst thing. It just takes one person. It just takes one straight person to completely destroy any kind of debate. This really has to be done in person. And you might say, I'm starting here. Would you join me? So I really think this has to be a small group. Start with small group. Like 10 or 12 people saying we're in. They talk to their 10 or 12, they talk to their 20. So I think I know this can have a ripple effect, because people have told me this has had a ripple effect on my community. I'm talking about left, right, and center.
Thank you. You mentioned Jonathan Haidt. So let me read a comment here. Philip asks or writes, Haidt in his book, Righteous Minds, claims that the scientific evidence suggests that axioms and premises that we have are best predicted through personality traits that are quite fixed at an early age. If this is true, shouldn't our debates with one another and our search for truth also include the exploration of each other's personalities?
I don't recommend it, because nobody wants to have their personality analyzed by another person. I actually think he's wrong. Because Haidt says, I mean, he's a moral psychologist. He's discovered we have these internal personality-based ways the way that we decide issues. And he says they're pretty fixed. And I think to myself, I've radically changed my opinion on things. And I know other people have as well. So I think as a so-called moral psychologist, he's not interested in, I think he's now interested in morality. When he wrote the book, he was more interested in the psychology side. I read the book and I said, you're a really smart guy, but you're wrong on the idea that people can't fundamentally change their mind when they're presented with axiom values and facts. I have. You have. Many people have. So on that, I think he's wrong. Now, there is a personality side. And if you're really close with somebody and you trust each other and you're not going to shame each other, you might say, hey, is this the way that you think? Do you bring this to other places? Is this rooted in some kind of way that you think and not just on this issue? So you say, yeah, I tend to think more compassion, more on fairness. Okay, that's interesting. But still, I think a compassion-based person, I'm using two of Jonathan Haidt's axioms, a compassion-based person might say, I'm going to overrule my compassion with a commitment to fairness. A fairness-based person says, I'm going to overrule my commitment to fairness with, a rule of compassion. I think it happens. So I believe that Haidt is wrong on this issue. Now, analytically, I think The Righteous Mind is a really good book. I just don't agree with his conclusions. But there's an example. I mean, I could be wrong. He could be right. It's okay. If I ever met the guy, I would say, hey, man, I think you were right about this and wrong about that. And hopefully he'd be respectful of me.
You mentioned before, you said something memorable of many things. One was, I mean, it's such a personal and challenging moment to say, I was right, so what? Can you talk a little about that in relation to Musar and Midot? Because we have a lot of Musarniks here. So can you just drill a little down on those moments in life?
Sure. So being, you might say the ego, what I call the ego self, ha'anochi in traditional literature, is attached to being right, intrinsically. The higher self, you might call the neshama, goes by a few different words in Judaism, is not attached to being right. It's attached to the truth. And so when you look inside yourself and you feel the attachment to being right, there is actually a willful disengaging of consciousness from the ego self. You actually have to go in and pull the pointer of consciousness out and say, it doesn't matter if I was right, if I wanted to be right. I have to engage some other values. For example, the bonds of family and friendship. And then the obligation to conduct myself righteously, even if I was right. Like, don't bully somebody. Let's say you have the facts. You don't crush another person with your facts. Like, I'm sure the black guy who collected those Ku Klux Klan, I don't think he start by saying, you're a foul white supremacist, let's talk. He probably started somewhere else. So sometimes when I look at my ego self and I say, well, I think the facts are on my side, but I conducted myself in a horrible way. I mean, I think as I've gotten older, I do it less and less because I've learned that even there are a few things about which I'm an expert. And I know that 99.9% of people are not experts. I mean, I have the facts, I know they don't. So they asked me a question and I realized this is unfair because they don't know how much I know. I got to go really gentle here, super gentle, and kind of find out what their factual basis is. And I said, can I share a few things that you can look up actually on, the Justice Department website, the FBI website? I mean, they kind of like some raw data. Can we look at some raw data? And they go, okay. And they look at the raw data and say, wow, I never knew that. I said, yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? So what I don't want to do is say, it's just a couple of things in life. I'm not saying I have this about everything. There's a couple of things in life I actually know a lot about. And somebody doesn't. And they didn't know they walked into the one guy who knows more than your average person. I got to be gentle. I got to walk carefully. And when I hit that resistance point where they say, well, I say, okay, all right, that's good. I heard you out. You heard me out. We did it respectfully and with love, and we're all good here.
I want to ask one possibly concluding question because I'm aware of the time. It's 8:10, excuse me. My question is, how does this apply to religious thinking? How do we apply these principles to interreligious dialogue?
Oh, I don't know what's up. I mean, if someone says, hey, Rabbi Finley, we want you and who's the Chabad rabbi you had on?
Rabbi Brisky.
Rabbi Brisky. So I say, Rabbi Finley and Rabbi Brisky talk. I wouldn't debate. What do we have to debate about? I say, let's study a text together. I love Chassidus. I mean, I don't really understand the point of debate. Jesus was the savior. Jesus wasn't the savior. Okay. Is that it? That's all we got? I would rather say, hey, what do we share? And let's study a text together. So I'm really not interested in debating axioms. They're not debatable. I mean, I will never persuade an evangelical Christian that Jesus is not the savior. And they're going to never persuade me that he is. It's just not going to happen. Let's talk about something else.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's really been interesting, and I felt like I was back in your class or many classes. I so enjoyed this tonight. Thank you so very, very much.
I hope your folks did as well. So
yeah, I'm sure they did. And I see there are more questions than I had time to ask you, and many comments as well. So thank you very, very much. It's been a gift, really a pleasure.
Really been my pleasure.
Raising their hand. Let me see if it's anything urgent. Otherwise,
I can stay on for a couple more minutes if anybody has.
okay. People are essentially thanking you.
Oh, great.
And yes, I have a lovely comment. Somebody says, fantastic with 5 exclamation marks.
Great.
And let's see, other people. Sherry talks about Yitzhak Greenberg's book, For the Sake of Heaven and Earth, why it's so wonderful. It's about being attached to truth rather than being attached to being right.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
someone else says, so Hillel would say, be gentle with the truth.
Very good. Nice.
And someone else, or Sherry says, do not follow the majority to do evil. Another salient quote here.
Yeah.
Let me ask you one more thing, because somebody asked this question early on and I ignored it. Do you think there can be a universal moral code? Do you think there is one, and is it useful?
There certainly is one. I'm a moral realist. So yes, there is one. I'm just not saying I know how to express it. So if you brought a case to me and said, well, there's a person torturing an innocent child, it depends on the culture. I wouldn't say that. Well, they thought it was right. The kid thought it was wrong. Who knows? I wouldn't say that. All things being equal, somebody torturing an innocent child is wrong. It's abhorrent. And I don't think you're going to provide a lot of facts where I go, oh, well, in that case, it's okay. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
I would never say it's relative to the culture. I'd never say, well, the kid thought it was wrong. The adult thought it was right. Who knows? You understand? I believe there is a universal moral code. You give me a case and we can talk about it. But I believe, remember, as a moral realist, I believe there are better and worse answers to moral questions, not right and wrong answers. I start with better and worse. We might get to right and wrong. But the reason I came up with this phrase, Rabbi Lipaz, is because I don't want to sound like an absolutist as if I know what the right answer is. I'll discover the right answer after you and I speak. So I just start by saying, I think there are better and worse answers, and we'll discover it when we talk.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. All right. Again, with my gratitude and respect for you.
All right.
I want to ask Wendy to join us and just make a couple final announcements. And I want to thank everybody very, very much. Rabbi Finley, of course, Wendy for organizing this, and the so many of you who've been with us tonight. I hope you've learned a lot, as I have, and been inspired to think differently and act differently, most importantly. Wendy?
Thank you so much, Rabbi, for an insightful and thought-provoking talk. And we really appreciate the time that you spent with us and your special words of wisdom. It was a privilege to have you speak to us and teach us. And I appreciate the special, insightful, and enlightening talk you gave tonight. I'd like to invite everyone to join us at our next Rabbi in Residence program on the 3rd Thursday of the month for future programs throughout the year. Next month, we are having Rabbi Laura Geller coming to speak to us from Temple Emmanuel of Beverly Hills on getting good at getting older. On April 15th, the following month, we have Rabbi David Woznicka from Stephen S. Wise Temple coming to speak to us, and we would love you to join us. You can find us on our website at vosla.org, and please contact me if you would like to sponsor a rabbi. We look forward to seeing you next month on the 18th, and thank you all for coming tonight.
2 friends of mine, that's great.
Wonderful.
By the way, if anybody wants to study with me, just go to my website, oratorah.org. I teach all kinds of classes and love to have you aboard.
Yeah, I'll just say Hatorah, O-H-R, Hatorah.
OHRTORAH.org. I got a lot of classes going on, Bible, mysticism, Siddur, wisdom classes, and everybody's invited, is open to the public. I just want to say again, my gratitude to be in this list of such august rabbis. I'm really honored. And Rabbi Lipaz, it's just great seeing you, man.
Yeah, it's great seeing you.
We're going to continue our conversation, right?
Yes, we are.
Thank you, everybody. It's been
all right, everybody. Good night. Be well. Stay safe and healthy. Thank you.